It was just another ordinary morning at Westbrook High. Students shuffled in with backpacks slung over their shoulders, teachers sipped lukewarm coffee, and the bell rang sharp at 8 a.m. The halls were buzzing with chatter, sneakers squeaking on the tiled floors, and the usual teenage laughter echoing off the lockers. Among the sea of faces was Maya Seagal, quiet, respectful, and always on time. She wasn't someone who made a lot of noise, but everyone knew who she was. Maya carried herself with confidence, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that made people notice. Her long black hair was braided neatly down her back, a style passed down from her grandmother. It was more than a hairstyle to Maya. It was culture, identity, and family. She never broke rules, never talked back, and never missed a homework assignment. Teachers admired her. Her friends adored her. But that day, something unexpected was waiting for her. As she walked into the building, Maya noticed the principal standing near the front office. He looked at her for a second too long. She felt it, that glance people give when they've already made up their mind about you. She brushed it off. Maybe he was just checking uniforms or doing his usual rounds. She had no idea that her hair would become the subject of controversy within the hour. By third period, she was called to the office. It was unusual, and it made her stomach twist. She couldn't think of anything she'd done wrong. She hadn't spoken out in class, hadn't used her phone, hadn't missed a single assignment. When she stepped inside, the room was too quiet. The principal sat with a stern look, a file in front of him and a cold tone in his voice. He told her that her hairstyle violated the school's grooming policy. Maya blinked in confusion. The policy had always mentioned no extreme hairstyles. She'd read it, signed it, and followed it. Her braid wasn't extreme. It was traditional, respectful, and neat. But the principal insisted. He said it distracted others, and didn't meet the standards. She tried to speak up, calmly, respectfully, but her voice didn't seem to matter. He'd already made a decision. What happened next didn't feel real. Without calling her parents. Without giving her a chance to defend herself. Without even considering that it might not be just about hair, he ordered the school nurse to bring clippers. Maya sat there in silence, frozen. She couldn't move. Couldn't speak. The nurse hesitated but followed instructions. With every buzz of the clippers, strands of Maya's identity fell to the floor. She wanted to scream, to cry, but the room felt heavy, like time itself had slowed down. When it was over, she looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Her braid was gone. Her hair was reduced to a rough, uneven stubble. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She left the office in silence. The hallway was quiet as students glanced her way, shocked and confused. No one knew what to say. She walked outside and took a deep breath. Then she pulled out her phone and made the one call that would change everything. "Dad," her voice cracked. "They cut my hair." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then a low, calm voice answered, "I'm on my way." What the principal didn't know, what the entire school had forgotten, was who Maya's father really was. Not just a parent. Not just a man with a phone number on file. But Steven Seagal. A man known not just for his strength, but for his unshakable sense of justice. A man who had spent his life defending others, standing up against wrongs, and never backing down when someone crossed a line. And that line had just been crossed. As Maya stood near the school gate, heart pounding and head exposed to the wind, a black car turned into the parking lot. And the atmosphere began to shift. The car came to a slow stop right in front of the school's main entrance. The door opened, and out stepped Steven Seagal. Dressed in black, calm as ever, but with a fire in his eyes that only a father could carry. The security guard at the front desk paused, unsure whether to greet him or get out of the way. Steven didn't speak. He didn't need to. He walked straight through the doors like he owned the place. People stepped aside instinctively. Inside the building, whispers started. "Is that really him? Why is he here? What happened?" But Maya already knew. The moment her father saw her, everything would change. She stood by the wall, her back straight, trying to stay strong. She didn't want him to see her cry. Steven turned the corner and spotted her instantly. He froze. Her head. Her face. Her expression. He didn't say a word, but his fists tightened. 1,000 thoughts must have rushed through his mind, but none more powerful than this one: they touched my daughter. He walked over, slow and steady. Maya looked up at him, unsure of what to say. But Stephen just placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I got you," he whispered. Then he turned and walked toward the principal's office. The secretary stood up, alarmed. "Sir, do you have an appointment?" Stephen didn't stop walking. He pushed open the door to the office without knocking. The principal, caught off guard, stood up from his chair immediately. "Mr. Seagal." But the actor raised a hand. Not to hit, not to intimidate, just to say, "Stop talking." There was silence. Thick, uncomfortable silence. Then Stephen spoke. His voice low and calm, but filled with steel. "Who gave you the right to touch my daughter?" The principal stammered, "We have school grooming policies, and her hair was not in line with the rules." Stephen took a step closer. "You shaved a child's head, without calling her parents, without permission. Do you understand what you've done?" The principal tried to explain. Her hairstyle was causing a distraction in class. "It's in the handbook." Stephen's tone didn't change. "That braid represents her heritage. Her grandmother wore it. Her culture wears it. You didn't just cut hair. You insulted her identity." The principal was visibly nervous now. "We followed the disciplinary code." "Let me ask you something," Stephen interrupted, his voice still calm. "Would you have done the same if it were your daughter?" There was no answer. Stephen stepped forward, eyes locked. "You embarrassed her. You humiliated her. You made her feel small in a place that's supposed to make her feel safe. That's not discipline. That's abuse of power." The air in the room was cold and still. No one dared to move. Finally, Stephen leaned in, just a little. "I've seen a lot of things in my life. Corruption, injustice, bullies with a badge or a title. And I've dealt with them all." He straightened up. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to call a meeting with the school board. You're going to report exactly what happened. Every detail. And you're going to take accountability." The principal tried to speak again, but Stephen cut him off. "You're also going to apologize. To Maya. To my family. And to every student who's ever been treated unfairly because of how they look." Still no reply. Stephen took one last look at the man in front of him. "Because if you don't, this won't be the last time you see me." He turned and walked out. Maya stood waiting in the hallway. Stephen placed a hand on her back and guided her gently outside. His silence said more than any speech could. He wasn't just angry. He was hurt. Not for himself, but for her. Outside, the sun was shining. Maya stood still for a moment, feeling it warm her skin. People watched from the windows. Nobody said a word. Stephen opened the car door for her. But before she stepped inside, something unexpected happened. A small group of students began to walk toward her. Slowly, quietly. Each of them had done something to their hair, a cut, a braid, a twist, something that looked like Maya's original style. They didn't speak. They just stood beside her. In that moment, Maya realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. The next day, the mood around Westbrook High was different. The usual morning buzz was quieter, more cautious. Students walked the halls like something important had happened, something bigger than a school rule, bigger than a simple mistake. Everyone had heard what went down. Whispers had traveled fast. Steven Seagal showed up, calm but deadly serious. And nobody could stop thinking about the way he handled it. But what surprised people even more was Maya. She showed up. Head held high. No hood, no hat, no effort to hide her shaved head. She walked through the halls like nothing had been taken from her. Not because she wasn't hurt, she was. But because she refused to let it define her. People watched her, but this time, it wasn't with judgment. It was with respect. They saw courage. They saw strength. And whether they said it out loud or not, they knew something had shifted. By lunchtime, more students had joined her quietly in protest. Some had braided their hair. Others wore scarves or headbands with cultural patterns. A few even shaved off pieces of their own hair in support. There was no announcement, no posters, no speeches. It just happened. One by one, kids made a choice. And that choice sent a message. The principal tried to ignore it at first. He carried on like everything was normal, but it wasn't. Staff members started asking questions behind closed doors. Some teachers whispered that the school had gone too far. Others said nothing, but their silence spoke volumes. By the afternoon, the school board called an emergency meeting. Stephen was there. He didn't need a suit or a lawyer or a crowd. He just sat quietly at the back of the room, arms folded, eyes sharp. Maya sat beside him, still silent, but with that same quiet strength she always carried. The meeting began with stiff introductions, the kind that sound polite but feel tense. Then came the review of the school's grooming policy, which hadn't changed in years. It was vague. It was outdated. And now, it was under fire. Parents had started calling in. News reporters sniffed around the edges. Social media was buzzing with hashtags like #JusticeForMaya and #HairIsHeritage. The school board knew they were on thin ice. Finally, they invited Maya to speak. She stood up slowly, her voice soft but clear. No anger. No drama. Just truth. She talked about how her braid wasn't just hair, it was a memory of her grandmother, who taught her how to weave it tight every Sunday. She explained how it made her feel close to her roots. How it gave her confidence. How that one act, the shaving, wasn't just a rule being enforced. It was something deeper. Something painful. You could hear a pin drop in that room. Even the principal, sitting stiff in his chair, had no words to fire back. Then Stephen spoke. Just a few lines. But they hit hard. He said that rules are meant to protect, not to humiliate. That discipline without understanding is just control. That when institutions forget to treat students like people, they lose the trust they're supposed to protect. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, because every word made people listen. After the meeting, there was no sudden applause. No dramatic ending. Just reflection. The kind that lingers. The kind that changes things. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. The principal was placed on temporary leave while the investigation unfolded. The grooming policy was suspended for review. And Maya, she was asked to join the student advisory committee to help rewrite the new policy. She didn't agree right away. She wanted time. She wanted to think. But deep down, she already knew her answer. Because she wasn't just doing it for herself anymore. She was doing it for every student who had been made to feel small. For every kid who had been punished for being different. For anyone who ever sat in silence because they thought their voice wouldn't matter. Now they knew better. It was a full week before the school sent out an official notice. A short, carefully worded statement. The administration acknowledges a lapse in judgment concerning the enforcement of grooming policies. We are working with students and families to ensure this never happens again. It didn't mention Maya's name. It didn't go into detail. But everyone knew who it was about. Inside the school, the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't fear. It was awareness. Teachers seemed more careful with their words. Students paid closer attention to what was happening around them. A quiet ripple of change moved through the hallways, not forced, not loud, but real. Maya still walked those halls, head uncovered, and still without saying much. She didn't have to. Her presence alone was enough. The girl with the shaved head was no longer just the girl who had her hair taken away. She was the one who stood tall when they tried to bring her down. And that left a mark deeper than any punishment ever could. Then came something unexpected. A freshman named Lila stopped her by the lockers one afternoon. She had been shy, barely noticeable in the crowd most days. But now, she stood holding a photo. It was an old picture of her mother in traditional dress, wearing the same braid Maya once had. "My mom used to wear hers like that," Lila said. "I never had the courage to do it. Not here. But I think I will now." She smiled, not nervously, but with quiet strength. Maya didn't say anything. She just nodded. Word got around. Stories started to surface, small stories, ones that usually stayed buried. A boy in ninth grade who had been told his dreadlocks were too messy. A girl who stopped wearing her hijab in gym class because she felt judged. A student who had been sent home for inappropriate clothing that actually reflected their cultural attire. For the first time, people were listening. Not just to Maya, but to each other. It wasn't a revolution. It wasn't loud or fast. But it was change, and it was happening, one voice at a time. At home, Stephen watched it all quietly. He never posted anything online. Never did an interview. He didn't need credit. He was a father who stood up when his daughter needed him. That was enough. But Maya noticed something about him. The way he looked at her now, not just with pride, but with something else. Like he was seeing her not just as his daughter, but as a force of her own. Someone who didn't just survive something painful, but turned it into something powerful. One night at dinner, he finally spoke up. "You know," he said, looking over his plate, "when I showed up at that school, I came to protect you." Maya looked up. "But it turns out," he continued, "you were the one protecting others." She didn't say anything, just smiled. That week, Maya agreed to join the policy committee. Not because she trusted the school completely. Not because she wanted to sit in meetings and read long documents. But because it gave her a chance to shape something. To make sure what happened to her didn't happen again, to anyone. She showed up to the first meeting with a notebook in hand. A few board members looked surprised to see her. Others looked relieved. She took a seat, flipped open her notebook, and waited for the meeting to begin. As they started discussing the policy language, what words to use, what phrases to update, Maya raised her hand. She wasn't loud. She wasn't emotional. Just clear. "If you're going to talk about grooming," she said, "you have to include respect. For culture, for religion, for individuality. Otherwise, it's not a policy. It's control." Nobody argued. They wrote it down. Outside the meeting room, the sun was starting to set. Students passed by the windows, some laughing, some serious, all living their ordinary days. But within those ordinary days now lived something different. A memory. A lesson. A spark. Weeks passed, but the memory of what happened at Westbrook didn't fade. If anything, it grew. Other schools in the district started asking questions. Their own students brought up grooming policies, dress codes, cultural respect. What had once been ignored or brushed aside was now part of every conversation. And at the center of it, quietly but firmly, was Maya Seagal. She didn't want attention. She didn't care about fame. But wherever she went, people noticed her. The girl with the buzzed hair. The daughter of Steven Seagal. The student who stood her ground without raising her voice. Everyone had their version of the story, but Maya never corrected them. She just kept doing what she'd been doing from the start, showing up, listening, and speaking when it mattered. One afternoon, the school announced a new student assembly. Not just for grades or announcements. This one was different. It was about voice, identity, respect. And they asked Maya to speak. At first, she said no. Standing on stage wasn't her thing. She didn't enjoy being looked at. But then a teacher reminded her, sometimes, people need to see strength with their own eyes to believe it's possible. So, Maya agreed. The gym was packed. Students sat in bleachers, fidgeting with phones, chatting quietly, waiting for something to happen. Teachers stood along the sides. The principal, now replaced by an interim leader, watched silently near the back wall. And then Maya walked out, small in stature, but not in presence. She didn't bring notes. She didn't rehearse a speech. She just looked out at everyone and began. "When I walked into this school after what happened, I felt like I had lost something. Not just my hair, but something deeper. My sense of safety. My voice. I thought maybe if I just stayed quiet, things would go back to normal." She paused, scanning the room. But then I realized, normal was the problem. The students were still. Nobody whispered now. I wore my hair the way my grandmother taught me. It wasn't a fashion choice. It was a piece of who I am. And when someone decided it didn't belong here, they didn't just cut hair. They cut history. They cut identity. Another pause. Some of you know what that feels like. Maybe it wasn't your hair. Maybe it was your accent. Your clothes. Your skin. Something that made you feel like you didn't fit into the rules someone else wrote. Heads began to nod in the crowd. I'm not here to blame. I'm here to ask a question. What if we made room for each other? What if schools weren't just places that teach math and science, but places that let people be fully themselves? Wouldn't that be worth more than any test score? She ended there. No dramatic mic drop. No forced applause. Just quiet. And then, slowly, the gym filled with clapping. Not the loud kind that follows a concert, but the steady kind that means something. Real respect. That day, something shifted in more than just policy. It shifted in people. Later, Stephen picked Maya up in the same black car. She got in, closed the door, and looked straight ahead. You spoke, he asked. Yeah, she said. How'd it go? She smiled. I think they heard me. He didn't say much else. He just nodded. But the way he looked at her, pride without words, it said everything. The next morning, a letter arrived at their home. Not typed. Not official. Just a folded piece of notebook paper, written in careful handwriting. Dear Maya, I've been hiding parts of who I am for a long time. You gave me the courage to stop. Thank you. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Because that letter wasn't just from one person. It could have been from anyone. And that was the point. The morning air was crisp when Maya stepped off the bus. The same sidewalk. The same school entrance. But everything felt different now. There was something lighter in the way students moved, something more open in the way they looked at each other. No one said it out loud, but everyone could feel it. Something had changed, and not just in rules or meetings. It was in the air. In people. Inside the building, the bulletin boards had been updated. Bright-colored posters with new messages: respect identity, hair is heritage, asterisk, we see you. Asterisk underneath each phrase were photos, students in all their differences. Dreadlocks, braids, curls, scarves, buzz cuts. It looked like real life now. Maya walked by the wall slowly. She didn't stop. She didn't need to stare. She just let it sink in that these changes, small as they seemed, were now part of the school's new rhythm. A rhythm she had helped start. In English class, her teacher asked students to write about a time they felt invisible and what brought them back. Maya hesitated at first. Then she picked up her pen. She didn't write about the haircut. She wrote about a time when she was 6 years old and got made fun of for bringing homemade food to school. She wrote about how she didn't touch that meal again for 3 years. Then she wrote about how one day, her dad cooked it again, and told her that the world doesn't get to decide what's beautiful. She never forgot that. As she finished writing, she noticed others writing deeply too. Quiet kids. Loud kids. The ones who always sat alone. The ones who always seemed like they had it all together. Everyone had a story. During lunch, something else caught her eye. At a corner table, the same group of students who once teased her were now sitting with Lila, the girl with the braid and the shy smile. They were asking about the fabric in her headband. She laughed as she explained the story behind the patterns. They weren't mocking her. They were curious. That shift, curiosity instead of judgment, was starting to take root. By the time last period came around, Maya was tired. Not from the day, but from the weight of everything that had happened over the past weeks. She found herself staring out the window, watching leaves drift down from the trees. One of them landed near the window pane and just stayed there. Still. Unbothered. Her thoughts wandered. What if this had all gone differently? What if her dad hadn't come? What if nobody had stood up for her? The truth was, it could have been any student, any parent. This time, it was her. But the deeper truth was this: every school, every hallway, every rulebook hides 100 silent battles. Most never get noticed. Most don't have a famous dad who shows up. Most kids just swallow the unfairness and move on. But not this time. After the final bell, Maya walked to her locker. Taped to it was a sticky note in pink marker. Asterisk, your strength made mine louder. Asterisk. Again, no name. Just words. Words that meant something. Outside the school, a local news van was parked discreetly at the curb. The driver leaned back, not filming, just watching. The story had already run last week, but the media hadn't really let go. They were waiting to see what would come next. Waiting to see if this was a one-time thing, or if the change would last. Stephen pulled up in his car, as he often did. Maya opened the door and slid in. He looked over. "You all right?" She nodded. "Yeah. Just thinking." He drove for a bit in silence, then said, "You know, I spent my life learning how to fight. With fists, with words, with silence. But what you did..." He glanced at her. "That takes a different kind of power." Maya didn't reply. She just looked ahead. The world outside the window kept moving. Kids on bikes. People crossing streets. Dogs barking in yards. Everything looked normal. But for Maya, nothing would ever be exactly the same again.